So I decided, continuing on my way to the secret, there was something in the city, something reliably concealed by the existing secrecy regime, and it wasn't atomic bombs. Around this time, I had a remarkable conversation with Georgy Pavlovich Luminsky. No, don't think I was on familiar terms with the director of the Enterprise, the last real director of the Enterprise, back then. You understand the difference between him and me, and the age difference. It's much simpler. It happened at the Olyonok Young Pioneer Camp, which the boss visited with joy and pleasure. That time, the director of VNIIP arrived unannounced, strolled around the grounds for half an hour, and then sat down on a bench near the administrative building, waiting for Anatoly Ivanovich Chushkov, then the camp director. My squad was on duty, so I sent the young pioneers to search for Anatoly Ivanovich, while I made small talk with Georgy Pavlovich for about 15 minutes. We'd already spoken once, so I was fairly relaxed about the very fact of our dialogue. The conversation quietly turned to me, to where I studied, what my job was, how they let me go from work to camp, whether I liked the job, and so on. After another turn in the topic, I inadvertently asked a question, the answer to which later, much later, clarified so much for me. I began like this: Georgy Pavlovich, this city was created to develop a very specific weapon. Let's assume that sooner or later it becomes unnecessary, no matter the reason, whether the world situation changes or someone starts producing a more advanced weapon somewhere. What will happen to the city? When I asked this purely theoretical, perhaps even idle question, I could hardly have imagined that in just a decade or so, it would concern every resident of Snezhinsk in a very concrete way. And Georgy Pavlovich, of course, wasn't thinking about it then. He paused for a moment, just long enough for me to wonder, horrified, if he'd blurted out something obviously stupid and offended an elderly man who devoted his entire life to unnecessary weapons. He smiled slyly, but the smile that had briefly flitted across his face suddenly vanished, and Luminsky, waving his hand with annoyance, replied strangely and incomprehensibly, "But is it really about this weapon? Today, my question doesn't seem either stupid or naive, and the boss's answer is filled with a profound meaning for me, one that only became clear to me a decade later." There was another conversation worth mentioning, a conversation with my uncle Kolya. From about 1959 until his retirement, he worked as a supply clerk at VNIIP. He knew a lot, he'd seen a lot. When he began telling his story, my sister and I would gape and listen, holding our breath. However, my parents, and indeed everyone who came into close contact with him, reacted to him the same way. In May of '93, we celebrated his 60th birthday. He followed me out onto the balcony for a smoke, and squinting at the setting sun, he said, continuing the conversation we'd started earlier, "Yes, any supply man has to be a scoundrel. That's common knowledge. He has to be flexible to please both our people and yours. And he also has to remember to do his job. But there's one more quality he absolutely must possess." Uncle Kolya took a drag on his cigarette and continued, He has to be aware of what he's doing, really aware of it. Everyone has to be aware of what they're doing, I replied diplomatically. He should, Uncle emphasized. But can everyone, hand on heart, say that's how they live? Uncle paused. In all my time working, in fact, in my entire life, I've only failed to explain this to myself once. Just once. How many can boast of something like that? What couldn't you explain to yourself? I asked, just to keep the conversation going. Uncle Collier glanced at me a little too quickly and then returned his gaze to the setting sun. That's true, he said reluctantly. I once received equipment, a whole trainload, but I never figured out how it was used. Is it the supplier's job to monitor the use of supplies? I asked, surprised. Especially in our secrecy. You might not even know what you were escorting or where it was going. You're stupid, Uncle said kindly. I might not have known what I was ordering or transporting, but I always knew the name, designation, or code name. I knew how many of this unknown thing I had with me, how much it weighed, where it came from, and where it was being transferred. Let's say cargo, ABV, was arriving in Sector A for Research B, under conditional funding C. You get the idea? So that equipment wasn't connected to any department of the Institute. Its index numbers vanished into obscurity. I doubt I'm completely accurate in relaying what Uncle said back then. I only understood one thing. The planners have their own ties that allow them to control the distribution of material resources, both at the nuclear center and in the city in general. Don't worry, Uncle, I reassured him. It only happened once. Someone just messed up the documentation. With me, Uncle said with a certain expression, it only happened once. He spat on the cigarette butt and tossed it down. But I'm not alone at the plant. There are dozens of supply workers, and I know for a fact that in that same year of '66, there was another similar incident, and with none other than Petrovich. Petrovich was an old friend of my uncle's, with whom he worked side by side for 30 years. I don't remember his last name, but as children, my sister and I often visited him. He lived on the 3rd floor of Vasilyeva Street, in the first entryway, I think. You're simply squandering socialist property. I laughed. I'm amazed we have anything left at VNIITEF at all. Lavrenti Pavlovich wasn't in your name. My uncle didn't accept my joking tone. On the contrary, he somehow pulled himself together and became serious. Lavrenti Pavlovich just happened to be here, he said gravely, although few people know about it. In July of '47, right here, wandering through our swamps. He wasn't alone, of course. He practically had a company of machine gunners with him. Don't believe me? A man from Kasley told me about it. His brother-in-law was his guide. Here's a question for you. What made the minister wander through these wilds? And he did, wasting 2 days, spending the night in a tent. And do you know where the camp was? Where? I asked eagerly, although a second before, I'd wanted to limit myself to the word bullshit. I'm interested. I don't know if you remember what used to be where the new surgical building is. I remember, I interrupted him. There was this rock face there, about 5 meters high. We used to climb it when we visited my father. He was in the old hospital in '68 with appendicitis. You have a good memory, Yura. Beria spent the night by that rock. Remember that. Just keep it to yourself. You'll be healthier. And remember about the train. You might need it. You never know. You were young. My uncle died in October of '93. His heart gave out when they shelled the White House. I often go to his grave and bring flowers. He, without even realizing it, opened my eyes to so much. Or maybe he knew something himself, but hid it well. It was a different generation, a silent one. After my uncle's story, my search became more conscious, more focused. At that time, publications on the history of the creation of atomic weapons began to appear, and in the book, The Secret of the 40, I was astonished to find indirect confirmation of the possibility of Beria's appearance in our region at the time my uncle mentioned. It turns out that on July 8th, 1947, the chairman of the special committee arrived in Kishtim to inspect the first industrial nuclear reactor under construction. It was obvious what he needed there. But what could he be doing here, 7 years before the decision to create a new institute and a new city was made? Could the story of Lavrenti Pavlovich wandering through the Sinarsky forests really be just a mythical echo of an inspection trip to the 40? I didn't believe it. My collection of facts related to the secret had been supplemented by another significant one. In those same books, I was surprised by the following. Not a single place did I find a remotely coherent explanation of why the need for a new institute arose at all, nor why it was decided to build the new institute precisely where it is now. It's located, yes, I saw the text of the famous decree, read Juchekin's memoirs, read references to Leminsky's story, listened to a ton of jokes about it, but everywhere there was a strange bewilderment, masked by profound, demagogic justifications. Judge for yourself. Summer of '54. Nuclear weapons were on the rise. The first hydrogen bomb was detonated. Mass-produced factories were springing up like mushrooms. Everything was fine. It was logical to expect a leisurely but comprehensive increase in the production the state so desperately needed. And then, like a bolt from the blue, they needed a backup for Artemis. They needed it, and that's it. Who needed it? Why? And the explanations that are still being given in defense of this decision. Just listen to their adherents. Some say that in case of an enemy attack in the rear, another atomic institute was needed. Let it be known, my dears, that by '49 the concept of the rear in Soviet military science was already recognized as exhausted itself and died a long time ago, thanks to atomic bombs, long-range aviation, and aircraft carriers. Others argue that the functioning of the second center should have fostered a spirit of healthy competition, contributing to an increase in the quality of manufactured goods. Competition. This was in the early 50s. Back then, just for that word alone, you could easily get yourself a slap on the wrist under Article 58.10 anti-Soviet propaganda and agitation for a minimum of 5 years in peacetime. Still others point to the Jews, saying that Arzimas was overrun with cosmopolitans back then. So whether you like it or not, they had to build their own cab for the Russian people. I refuse to even comment on this, but I can express myself. So much for the need for a new institute. Now about the location. I'll say it straight away. Whatever anyone says, neither KB11, the Research and Development Complex of the future Arzimas 16, nor Facility A, the first industrial reactor of the future Chelyabinsk 40, nor any of the serial plants were built on a site completely bare in terms of communications and infrastructure. There's no denying the difficulties were colossal, but there was no idiocy in this regard. The country knew how to count its money. It was its own, the people's. I'm not being ironic. And they wouldn't just cut down a forest in the remote taiga and build roads there. They could have built a facility next to the Sorokovka. Fortunately, everything there was running smoothly by then. Established production, transportation, and fissile materials were just a stone's throw away. They could have connected Snezhinsk to the cereal producers in Zlatust 20. After all, we still work together to this day, inseparably. There are 5 more options, each logical in its own right and in no way inferior to Snezhinsk in terms of security and secrecy. It's absurd to think that a city located just 30 kilometers from the 40 would make it top secret, as well as in terms of safety in the event of an accident. Anything is possible, but for some reason, none of these options were chosen. Why? Because for some unknown reason, completely unrelated to the nuclear issue, the city had to be built precisely at its current location.